What if I told you that every dollar in your bank account could disappear tomorrow? Not stolen, not hacked, just gone. Sound crazy? It's happened before, over and over again. And the terrifying part? Most people never see it coming. If you want to learn how to protect yourself from what history keeps trying to teach us, hit that subscribe button right now. Because on this channel, we dig up the financial disasters everyone forgot about so you don't become the next victim. Here's something they don't teach you in school. Every empire in history has told its people the same lie. Your money is safe. Trust us. We've got this under control. Rome said it. France said it. The Confederacy said it. Modern governments say it today. And every single time, they were wrong. From ancient Byzantium to modern-day Lebanon, people have gone to bed thinking their savings were secure, only to wake up and discover everything they worked for was worthless. Their paychecks? Meaningless. Their future? Stolen by the very systems they trusted to protect them. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. Collapse isn't some rare disaster. It's the default setting of financial systems. The real question isn't if the system will fail, it's how you protect yourself when it does. We all make the same mistake. We look at our bank balance. We see our national currency. We assume it's solid, permanent, real. But here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Money is not real. It's trust, and trust can evaporate overnight. That's why studying history isn't just interesting, it's survival. Every collapse leaves behind clues, patterns, warnings about what actually protects wealth and what turns to dust when the storm hits. And if you pay close attention to these patterns, you'll notice something critical. The people who survive financial disasters aren't the ones who trusted the system the most. They're the ones who doubted it first. Let me show you what I mean. Let's start with the Byzantine Empire. Most people know it as the eastern half of Rome that somehow survived for 1,000 years after the Western Empire crumbled. Pretty impressive, right? At the heart of their economy was a gold coin called the solidus. This wasn't just any coin. This was the coin. Merchants from Europe to Asia to the Middle East accepted it without question. For centuries, it was basically the world's reserve currency. Now here's the part that should sound familiar. You'd think the Byzantines would have learned from Rome's earlier disaster, right? When Roman emperors kept diluting the silver denarius until it was basically worthless tin with a fancy coating? We've covered that disaster before on this channel. But no, centuries later, the Byzantines made the exact same mistake with gold. They started shaving down the purity, mixing in cheaper metals, stretching their gold thinner and thinner. At first, nobody noticed. The coins still looked like gold. They still felt like gold. But then, the trust cracked. Once people realized the coin that had anchored international trade for centuries was being debased, it became just another government promise. And government promises, as history shows us again and again, are worth exactly nothing when the illusion breaks. The Byzantine economy lost the stability it had enjoyed for generations. So who survived? Not the people holding official coins, not the people who trusted the government's promises. The survivors were the merchants who had quietly hoarded real gold, pure gold, and land the empire couldn't touch. First lesson: governments cannot resist the temptation to destroy their own money. And when they do, real value runs away from anything they can counterfeit. But not every collapse comes from greedy rulers playing games with currency. Sometimes disaster strikes out of nowhere. In the mid-1300s, Europe was hit by the most devastating pandemic in human history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all Europeans died. Let that sink in. Half gone. Cities became ghost towns. Villages disappeared completely. Trade routes collapsed. You'd think this would be pure catastrophe for everyone, right? Wrong. Because here's what happens when half the workforce vanishes. Suddenly, labor becomes precious. The survivors could demand wages their parents never dreamed of.
Food that was once scarce became relatively abundant compared to the number of people. Families who had even a little bit of money or resources suddenly had leverage they'd never had before. Land that once cost a fortune, now it sold for pennies on the dollar. Houses stood empty. Fields went unplowed. The survivors were living in a buyer's market. If this sounds uncomfortably familiar, it should. During the COVID pandemic, we watched a modern version of this play out in real time. Supply chains shattered.
Governments printed trillions of dollars to keep the economy from seizing up completely. And what happened? Massive inequality. People with cash and assets bought up property while everyone else scrambled to pay rent. Housing prices exploded. Stock markets recovered almost instantly while millions of ordinary people struggled to survive. The parallel is crystal clear. Pandemics redistribute wealth. They always have. Survivors of the Black Death who had liquidity used it to climb the social ladder. Survivors of COVID with savings scooped up stocks, real estate, and businesses that desperate people were forced to sell. The lesson? Crises reward those with reserves and destroy those without them. It's not fair, it's not comfortable, but it's true. Now let's talk about what happens when the institutions everyone trusts suddenly fail. In the 1340s, Florence was the financial capital of Europe, the powerhouse, home to legendary banking families like the Bardi and Peruzzi. These weren't small-time lenders, these were the giants. Too big to fail, right? They had lent enormous sums to kings across Europe, most disastrously to Edward III of England, who was burning through cash fighting wars with France. And then, Edward stopped paying. Just like that, he defaulted on his debts. When that happened, the banks collapsed like dominoes. Depositors were wiped out. Trade froze. Florence, one of the richest cities in the world, was thrown into chaos. Ordinary people who had trusted these mighty banking dynasties learned a brutal lesson. Size is not safety. Reputation is not protection. Sound familiar? This exact pattern has repeated over and over. From the Florentine crash to Lehman Brothers in 2008 to Lebanese banks freezing accounts in 2019. The lesson? Too big to fail is a lie as old as finance itself. Institutions exist to profit, not to protect you. When they collapse, they take your savings with them. Survival belongs to those who recognize that promises are only good until the day they're not. Here's a story most Americans have never heard. The Civil War wasn't just fought with bullets and cannons. It was fought with printing presses. Both the Union and the Confederacy discovered that war on that scale costs more money than any government actually has. So what did they do? They printed it. In the North, the government issued greenbacks, paper money not backed by gold, but by the promise of the United States itself. At first, people were patriotic. They accepted the paper. But the more greenbacks flooded the economy, the less they could buy. Inflation ate away at their value. In the South, it was catastrophic. The Confederacy printed graybacks like there was no tomorrow. And by the end of the war, there literally was no tomorrow for Confederate currency. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. Prices increased by thousands of %. Soldiers' paychecks became worthless before they could even spend them. Families carried bags full of bills that couldn't buy a single loaf of bread. By 1865, Confederate currency wasn't just weak, it was dead, completely, utterly worthless. So what actually held value? Land, food, gold, anything real. Paper promises became a cruel joke. For ordinary Southerners, this was devastating. Lifelong savings evaporated into nothing. But for people with access to tangible goods, the war became an opportunity to buy property and wealth at fire sale prices. Here's the lesson most Americans never learned. Your own country has already lived through a currency collapse. And when it happened, protection didn't come from trusting paper. It came from holding value the system couldn't inflate away. France offers one of history's most brutal lessons in how revolutions can destroy money faster than any war. In the 1790s, French revolutionaries toppled the monarchy and seized all the church's land and property. Massive wealth, now in government hands.
So they came up with what seemed like a brilliant idea: issue paper currency backed by all this confiscated property. They called it the assignat. In theory, it was genius. The notes were backed by real assets, so they should hold value, right? Wrong. The government couldn't resist the printing press. They kept issuing more assignats. Each new wave diluted the last. Prices spiraled upward. Wages couldn't keep pace. Soon, the assignat became worthless. Farmers refused to sell food for paper. They demanded actual goods or silver instead. In Paris, people rioted over bread. The revolution, fueled by promises of equality and prosperity, devoured itself in inflation and chaos. Who won in this collapse? Not the people waving paper patriotically. The winners were the ones holding food, gold, or property, things the government couldn't print. For the average Parisian, the lesson came too late. Promises, no matter how noble or revolutionary, are only worth what other people will accept. When trust breaks, your savings don't just shrink, they vanish completely.
Fast forward 2 centuries to 1997. Thailand had been booming. The economy was growing. Money was flowing in from around the world. Everything looked great. There was just one problem. Thailand had borrowed heavily in US dollars, confident that its currency peg would hold forever. It didn't. When the Thai baht collapsed, debts denominated in foreign currency became unpayable overnight. And it didn't stop there. The crisis spread like wildfire. Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea. Currencies collapsed in a chain reaction across Southeast Asia. Economies shrank. Unemployment exploded. Governments begged the International Monetary Fund for rescue packages. And who suffered the most? Not the global hedge funds who triggered the panic. Not the Wall Street investors. It was ordinary people. Their savings lost value. Their mortgages doubled in cost. Their jobs disappeared. Meanwhile, who benefited? The people holding US dollars. The people with assets outside the region. International institutions that walked in and bought Asian assets at fire sale prices. What looked like a regional crisis was actually a massive global transfer of wealth. The pattern is painfully clear. Debt in someone else's currency is a death trap. When the storm hits, it's not the creditor who drowns, it's the debtor. By now, you might be thinking, okay, but these are all historical examples. This stuff doesn't happen anymore in the modern world. Let me tell you about Lebanon. Between 2019 and 2021, Lebanese banks did something that still seems unthinkable to people in developed countries. They locked the doors. Citizens woke up one day to find their deposits frozen. Withdrawals were limited to tiny amounts. And the Lebanese pound collapsed, losing over 90% of its value. A lifetime of savings became pocket change. People lined up outside banks, literally begging for access to their own money, and they were told no. This wasn't just small savers. Middle-class families, retirees, doctors, engineers. Anyone who trusted the banking system was wiped out. The lesson is brutal. Your money in the bank is not sitting in a vault with your name on it. It's a loan you've made to an institution that can decide, in a crisis, not to pay you back. The people who survived? Those who had diversified abroad. Those who held physical assets like gold or property. Those who kept cash outside the banking system. Everyone else was trapped. If you think this is far away and irrelevant, think again. In 2008, Americans watched their homes repossessed and their retirement savings decimated, while the banks that caused the crisis got bailed out with taxpayer money. In 2020, governments printed trillions during the pandemic, inflating asset prices for the wealthy while ordinary wages stagnated. In 2023, regional banks in the United States collapsed almost overnight when depositors lost confidence, reminding everyone that safe is just a word until the door slams shut. So here's the question that matters. How do you protect yourself when everything falls apart? History shows there's no single magic answer. In Byzantium, protection was real gold, not debased coins. After the Black Death, it was having liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, it was not trusting too big to fail bankers.
In the Confederacy, it was holding hard goods instead of paper. In revolutionary France, it was food and property. In Asia, it was avoiding debt in foreign currency. In Lebanon, it was getting money out of banks before they froze accounts. The specific tactics change, but the theme is constant. Survival comes not from blind trust in paper or institutions, but from recognizing what holds real value when illusions collapse. And here's the paradox that should wake you up. Collapse is both a tragedy and an opportunity. For the unprepared, it's total ruin. But for those with resilience, liquidity, or assets that can't be printed away, it's the moment to acquire wealth at a fraction of its normal cost. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners because there was too much land and not enough people. After 2008, people with cash bought homes while millions were being foreclosed on. After every crisis, wealth transfers from the many who trusted to the few who prepared. History shows us that protection isn't just about defense. It's about positioning yourself to acquire what others, under pressure, are forced to give up. But wealth isn't only about what you own. It's also about what you can do. The survivors of history weren't just people with gold or property. They were people who could create value when others couldn't. The baker who could still provide bread. The craftsman who could repair tools. The farmer who could feed a community. The merchant who could move goods across borders. These were the people who didn't just survive collapses, they rose in them. In every crisis, money loses meaning.
But production never does. People still need to eat. They still need to build, trade, and live. And those who can meet those needs are never poor for long. That's the deeper protection. Not blind faith in institutions, not hope that governments or banks will save you, but the combination of real assets, real skills, and the awareness that illusions always collapse. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. History has shown this pattern again and again and again. So the question is not whether everything falls apart, it always does. The question is whether you'll be one of the many left holding worthless promises, or one of the few holding something real. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you ignore its lessons, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective on how fragile our system really is, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because while everyone else is trusting the system, we're studying the patterns. While everyone else is assuming their money is safe, we're learning from every empire that made that same fatal mistake. History has all the answers. I'm just here to show you where to look. I'll see you in the next dig.